Good evening and welcome to just about the first event at Evergreen to start on time in 30 years. My name is Brian Price. I'm a member of the faculty and currently Dean of First Year Studies. And I want to welcome you this evening to the presentation by Dr. Bell Hooks. Who is our Dan Evans Chair for 2001-2002. I want to tell you the rules. Firstly, this is my Vanna act. Firstly, the bathrooms are down the corridor to the left. Secondly, no photographs or videoing except for the official people here during the presentation. Thirdly, we'd appreciate it if you turn off all cell phones and beepers, unless you're expecting a call for Bell. Fourthly, Maya Angelou says, when truth teller and careful writer Bell Hooks offers a book, I like to be standing at the bookshop when it opens. Dr. Hooks' latest book, Communion, The Female Search for Love, was released last week. The bookshop is to my left. After her reading and the question and answer session, Dr. Hooks will be available to sign books at the table to my right with the lovely little lamp on it. If you want Dr. Hooks to sign your book, which you can buy after the question and answer session, please open it to the page you wish her to sign prior to arriving at the table. And please do not ask Dr. Hooks to sign more than 3 books. So if you brought with you all 21 of her books, leave 18 on the seat. During the question period following Dr. Hooks' reading, it is preferable to ask a question as against making a lengthy statement. Finally, if you ever have occasion to read a list of rules like this to greeners, try to do it seriously and deadpan, but make sure that you're laughing on the inside. Before I introduce Dr. Hooks, there are 2 people among many I could thank to whom I want to give special recognition for their work in making Dr. Hooks's presence at Evergreen possible. The first is Lee Little. Is Lee around? Would he stand up, please? Oh, he's right up there. That's Lee Little in the hat. He's carrying his new child with him. Lee is my predecessor as Dean of First Year Studies and is currently Dean of the Library. It was his initiative to bring to the college the first African-American Dan Evans Chair. Without him, this would not have been possible. The second person I want to thank is my colleague and friend, Amy Betts, who's right down here. Stand up, Amy. Amy has efficiently and enthusiastically done all of the daily work of smoothing Dr. Hooks' path to our door. And she's simply invaluable. Bell Hooks did her undergraduate work at Stanford University and completed her doctorate at UC Santa Cruz, right at the edge of our bioregion. She has taught at Oberlin, Yale, City College and City University of New York. These days, she's a full-time writer and lecturer with a hectic schedule. So we're very lucky and quite delighted to have her with us this week on main campus, where she will be working with the Politics of Sin and Punishment program. Any students from that program here? Oh, there's at least one. She'll be working with the Women in Wisdom program, the Ecology of Hope program, as well as participating in First People's Day of Absence. Yay! And next week, in part as a way of honoring the Tacoma campus for its new building and its contributions that are ongoing to the Hilltop community in Tacoma, Dr. Hooks will be working next week with both the bridge and advanced level programs on the Tacoma campus. By way of setting a context, we're living in an era of globalization. On the one hand, it feels like we're beginning to realize the significance of diversity at the very time that the erasure of cultural differences is accelerating. On the political economic level, material inequalities are becoming increasingly stark as American goods production and consumption is straining the world's human and natural resources, while simultaneously polarizing the people it is bringing into increasingly intimate but unequal contact. In a world where one American consumes as many resources as 10 Chinese people, or as many as 331 Ethiopian people on a daily basis, what diversity do we wish to sustain? What differences do we wish to diminish? The demands fostered by our resource consumption and the political, economic, and military organization of the world necessary to sustain it produce the strains that result in September 11, in global economic recession, in a Washington state budget deficit, in yet another budget cut for the college, and thus in the possibility of upcoming tuition increases for many of you. The world, which dances increasingly to an American tune, whether it likes the rhythm or not, thus arrives at our doorstep. And this means that we can no longer claim that what happens in Afghanistan, Palestine, South Africa, or Northern Ireland does not affect us and is not intimately about us. There is no unimplicated place where we are privileged to stand anymore, no ignorance it is possible to feign. Yet the best this country's political leadership can offer us by way of a vision of what to do after 9/11 is to suggest that we go shopping, inviting us to press more heavily on the accelerator of consumption while assuring us that the problem is the solution to the problem. But this time, and in this place, by listening to the voice of a real leader, this time, instead, we might begin with love. Bell Hooks.
There's a book called There Are No Accidents, and it's by a psychoanalyst that writes about how there's like a thread running through our lives, tapestries. And I was thinking about that thread today because I actually came to Evergreen State right at the beginning of writing my trilogy on love. And here I am right at the end with the last book in the trilogy on love, talking about circles of love in which we dance. When I was here before, Jane was president. If you buy communion, you can read a passage about Jane from her memoir that she had written that she gave to me when I was here. So I was thinking again about the circles of sisterhood and solidarity that we long for, the circles of love that we long to be embraced in, I want to start by reading a little bit from All About Love. And I really feel always so strongly that when people have the writer before them, you don't really need the writer to read the book, because you can buy the book and read it yourself or get it out of a library, that it's good to be able to talk with the writer. So what I want to do is read just a couple of passages, because I do think it's often helpful to hear the voice of a writer reading. And this particular passage was the passage that I read for the first time publicly here at Evergreen when I was here before. When I was a child, it was clear to me that life was not worth living if we did not know love. I wish I could testify that I came to this awareness because of the love I felt in my life. But it was love's absence that let me know how much love mattered. I was my father's first daughter. At the moment of my birth, I was looked upon with loving kindness, cherished, and made to feel wanted on this earth and in my home. To this day, I can't remember when that feeling of being loved left me. I just know that one day I was no longer precious. Those who had initially loved me well turned away. The absence of their recognition and regard pierced my heart and left me with a feeling of brokenheartedness so profound I was spellbound. Grief and sadness overwhelmed me. I didn't know what I'd done wrong, and nothing I tried made it right. No other connection healed the hurt of that first abandonment, that first banishment from love's paradise. For years, I lived my life suspended, trapped by the past, unable to move into the future. Like every wounded child, I just wanted to turn back time and be in that paradise again, in that moment of remembered rapture, where I felt loved, where I felt a sense of belonging. We can never go back. I know that now. We can go forward. We can find the love our hearts long for, but not until we let go grief about the love we lost long ago when we were little and had no voice to speak the heart's longing. All the years of my life, I thought I was searching for love. I found retrospectively to be years where I was simply trying to recover what had been lost, to return to the first home, to get back the rapture of first love. I was still mourning, clinging to the broken heart of girlhood, to broken connections. When that mourning ceased, I was able to love again. I began writing about love, in part because as I was reaching the midpoint of my life, writing so much and so deeply about domination, about race, gender, class, I began to feel that sense of questioning and that small sense of despair that many of us feel about why has so little changed? Why are we so unable to let go our attachment to domination? You know, why, as Martin Luther King wrote so eloquently in Strength to Love, why are we standing in the shadows of fascism? Now, some of us are old enough to remember a song that was called Standing in the Shadows of Love. You know, I began to talk to people about what force in your life has motivated you to change. What force has motivated you to work for justice? My fundamentalist Christian parents were motivated to work against their homophobia by the love that they felt for their daughter. I have 5 sisters, one of whom's a lesbian. I just talked to so many people that said the real force that enabled them to overcome some hardcore commitment to domination was love. And I began to think about why it is we have ceased to focus on love. I still believe that the civil rights movement in this nation was one of the most powerful revolutionary movements for social justice the world has ever known, and that its power lay in being a movement rooted in the ethic of love. And that is what led me to write the 3 love trilogies, of which Communion, the female search for love, is the last in the trilogy. I want to start by reading the beginning of it, where I say, women talk about love. From girlhood on, we learn that conversations about love are a gendered narrative, a female subject. Our obsessions about love begin not with the first crush or the first fall. They begin with the first recognition that females matter less than males, that no matter how good we are, in the eyes of a patriarchal universe, we're never quite good enough. Femaleness in patriarchal culture marks us from the very beginning as unworthy or not as worthy. And it should come as no surprise that we learn to worry most as girls, as women, about whether we're worthy of love. I did a radio show today by satellite here in Washington, D.C., and the radio announcer, an African-American man, kept trying to push me about, do I really believe men and women, think differently about love? And I said, do you know of a group of guys that ever sit around talking about, well, I'm really afraid that I'll never be loved. I don't think I'm ever gonna find love. I'm not sure that I'm loving. Think about how many women you know, how many girls. Girls begin this conversation very, very early in their lives, raised with competitive, fault-finding mothers and fathers whom we can never really please, or in a world where we may be the perfect daddy's girl who learn that we need his approval so much that we will stop eating, stop growing up, because we see daddy losing interest, because we see he doesn't love women. We are uncertain about love. To keep his love, we must cling to girlhood at all costs. All girls continue to be taught, despite feminist movement when they're young, if not by their parents, then by the culture around them, that they must earn the right to be loved, that femaleness is not good enough. This is a female's first lesson in the school of patriarchal thinking and values. She must earn love. She is not entitled. She must be good to be loved. And good is always defined by someone else, someone on the outside. Writing about her relationship with her dad in the essay, Dancing on My Father's Shoes, Patricia Ruff offers a heart-rending account of losing the sense of being worthy of love, of being valued, confessing, quote, "My mother told me that he wanted a daughter first and couldn't have been more delighted when he got me. So I was surprised and unprepared when my status, quite without warning, was ripped away raggedly like a sheet of paper torn from a notebook. Something happened that no one explained to me. I had no voice for my feeling and was without words for the anger and pain over his being suddenly beyond reach. Concerned that her younger sister might feel the same pain of being emotionally rejected, Ruff suggested that they confront their father together. Quote, "We burst into their bedroom, threw ourselves on our stunned father, who remained stone still and speechless as we cried all over him, grabbing him, holding him, not wanting to let go. 'Daddy, please hold us. Tell us you love us. We love you. We need you to love us,' we begged." Rejection and abandonment by fathers and mothers is the space of lack that usually sets the stage for female desperation to find and know love. Often girls feel deeply cared about as small children, but then find as we developed willpower and independent thought that the world stops affirming us, that we are seen as unlovable. This is the insight Madonna Klossmanschlag shares in Lost in the Land of Oz about the nature of a female's fate. Quote, "In some fundamental way, we have all been deprived of love, of mothering. If not of love, then of the feeling that we have been loved. Knowing we were loved is not enough. We have to feel it. How can any girl sustain the belief that she's loved, truly loved, when all around her she sees that femaleness is despised, Unable to change the fact of femaleness, she strives to make herself over to become someone worthy of love. Schooled to believe that we find ourselves in relation with others, females learn early to search for love in a world beyond our own hearts. In my first book on the subject, All About Love, New Visions, I was careful to state again and again that women are not inherently more loving than men, but that we are encouraged to learn how to love. That encouragement has been the catalyst for women to seek love, to look hard and long at the practice of love, and to confront our fears of not being loving, of not being loved enough. The women in our culture who have the most to teach everyone about the nature of love are the generations of females who learned through feminist struggle and feminist-based therapy that self-love was the key to finding and knowing love. We, women who love, are among a generation of women who move beyond the patriarchal paradigms to find ourselves. The journey to true selfhood demanded of us the invention of a new world, one in which we courageously dared to rebirth the girl within and welcome her into life, into a world where she is born valued, loved, and eternally worthy. Loving that girl within has healed the woundedness that often led us to search for love in all the wrong places. Midlife for many of us has been the fabulous moment of pause where we begin to contemplate the true meaning of love in our lives. We begin to see clearly how much love matters, not the old patriarchal versions of love, but a deeper understanding of love as a transformational force, demanding of each individual accountability and responsibility for nurturing our spiritual growth. We bear witness to the truth that no female can find freedom without first finding her way to love. Our search for love has led us to understand fully the meaning of communion. In the Eros of Everyday Life, Susan Griffin writes, quote, "The wish for communion exists in the body. It is not for strategic reasons alone that gathering together has been at the heart of every movement for social change. These meetings were in themselves the realizations of a desire that is at the core of human imaginings, the desire to locate ourselves in community, to make our survival a shared effort, to experience a palpable reverence in our connections with each other and the earth that sustains us. The communion in love our souls seek is the most heroic and divine quest any human can take." I want to read that sentence again because I feel it's so crucial to the message of this book and the message I'd like to leave you with this evening. The communion in love our souls seek is the most heroic and divine quest any human can take. I say that because the very notion in our society of who we think of as the hero is tied to visions of war, conquest, domination, and not visions of love. That in fact, no matter how much love has led us into the very place where bell hooks can stand on this stage, we still act like love really isn't that important. I mean, it's just amazing when you think about it, because love was so much at the heart of the success of the civil rights movement. People who loved justice enough to put their lives on the line, to sacrifice, to give, to change. I'm always awed by the moment in Spike Lee's film, Four Little Girls, which I think is just such an awesome documentary that every American should see, because it is a documentary about political terrorism. You know, after September 11th, I was on a panel with very powerful, wealthy white men in New York at the New York Film Festival. Oliver Stone, Christopher Hitchens, Tom Pollock, a whole bunch of white men. The Haitian filmmaker, I'm losing his name right now, I apologize, who just made the film about, I'm so tired, I'm losing all these names, I apologize, and Christine Vachon, who made Boys Don't Cry. But one of the things that Christopher Hitchens said was, Americans don't know anything about terrorism. This is the first time terrorism has ever struck in this nation. And I said, tell that to the parents of Addie, Cynthia, Denise, the little girls who were bombed in that church in Birmingham. I said, do you think that because there were only 4 little girls, that their parents feel like this wasn't really terrorism? You know, it didn't really affect our lives. And so what really struck me is this desire people have to rewrite history. Because, you know, as a nation, we didn't identify with those 4 little girls. Most of you in this room don't even know their names. And yet, if you followed their story, if you've seen Spike's film, you know how deeply their parents still grieve for them today. I mean, that was the awesome, to me, message of 4 little girls, that we not only saw the post-traumatic stress that black people feel in this nation when we are the victims of racial terrorism. I mean, remember that the sister goes insane, who was forced by racist white policemen to identify the decapitated body of her sister. And in the film, she keeps repeating, it was a church. We should have been safe. But for the first time ever in the history of this nation, we see poignantly the way racial terrorism marked the lives of all of these black folks. And the white boy, remember the white boy who is now a grown man, and he talks about how it was a moment of truth for him because he recognized that his parents lied, that there was a conspiracy, that the white people did know more than they were saying. And it was the kind of moment where it transformed his idea of citizenship, patriotism, because he knew he was participating in a lie, the lie that white supremacy isn't organized, that white people don't support each other in continued acts of racial terrorism. But when I speak about love, there is the white woman in the film who dares to tell the truth. And if you remember, Spike, because of his sexism, doesn't give her enough play in the film. But if you remember, she is motivated to come forward and tell the truth about her cousin, I think he is, because of her love of divine spirit. And she is challenged in the same way that Martin Luther King used to talk about what happened to him when he had to stand in his faith and say, how can I say that I worship a God of love and support war? I mean, if you study the life of Dr. King, that's the transformative, radicalizing moment for him when he says, here I am talking about a God of love and a God of peace. I cannot support war. And if you study Dr. King's life, you know that when he made that decision to speak out against militarism, imperialism, he was terrorized by this government, by a punishing state. He was no longer the golden boy, but he relied on a scripture from Romans that said, be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewal of your mind, that you may know what the Spirit of God is. I mean, that was for me a deep, deep moment, because a lot of times when I despair in my life, I look to the people before me who have endured. And I think that King, for him, in that moment where he says, I can't be a hypocrite. I have to be a person of faith. And I urge you to read Dr. King's sermons, where he talks about the dangers of militarism, imperialism, and a hedonistic consumerism that will lead us as a nation to seek to destroy and subordinate the world in the interest of satisfying our greed. So that's why in these books on love, you will find a lot of discussion about greed. I want to read a chapter on lesbian love because, you know, one of the things that it has been my great blessing as a thinker and a writer to write books that go out to a mass public and to be able to include in them the kinds of discussions that you won't normally read in a mainstream self-help book. In Salvation, Black People in Love, I included a chapter on Black gay people, and this was the chapter that I got the most hate mail. Or frequently when I would go to predominantly black colleges, people would take me aside and they'd say, "Would you try not to read from that chapter?" A lot of the hate mail that I got would say, "You're talking about the contributions that black gay people have made, but what about those black gay men that have raped little boys?" And I thought to myself, think about all the heterosexual men who are raping children even as we speak. But that does not lead people to say, "Oh, let's hate all heterosexuals. Let's stamp out heterosexuality." I wrote these people back to say, look, think about what you're doing, that you want to negate all the contributions of black gay people because of an incident you heard about with one individual. And it may even be that these people were themselves the victims. But it does not change the fact that they will extrapolate. And we see that happening around the situation of Arab people right now in this nation. If we think we're wounded by one Arab, then let's hate all Arabs and all people that we can see looking like Arabs. Evidently, I look a lot like an Arab to a lot of people because I keep being stopped and searched and, talked to in all manner of, "Are you an American? Where are you from?" We finally decided it was these scarves that I wore that, Americans don't seem to really wear scarves. And now you may notice that when you go to the airports, you have to take off your scarves because of the weapons that could be hidden within them. Here's a chapter called "For Women Only, Lesbian Love." I'm just going to read a couple of paragraphs. "All women looking for love are not looking for men. Same-sex love has always been a reality. Increasingly, it has become a choice. Today's lesbians are both born and made. By this I mean that the accepted belief that one's sexual preference has already been formed in childhood still holds true, even as the reality of women's experience also stands as testimony to the fact that one can also choose to be a lesbian, and such a choice can be made late in life. Greater lesbian visibility in the 90s has led many women who had previously not considered women as potential partners to have a change of heart. Significantly, when Sherry Height published her report on Women in Love, A Cultural Revolution in Progress, she included a section on women loving women. The data she reported that most surprised her readers stated that a large number of women who had lived most of their lives as heterosexuals were choosing relationships with women in midlife. Many of these women claimed to find in their bonds with females a level of intimate connection that they had never had with men. Lindsay Van Gelder, co-author of The Girls Next Door: Into the Heart of Lesbian America, openly confesses that she was pretty happily heterosexual. While she enjoyed sex with men, she found, quote, "the guys in my life were often emotionally disappointing." At the onset of the contemporary feminist movement, consciousness-raising groups were the place where lesbian women came and talked about their lives with straight women. It was there that many heterosexuals were first asked to explain why women disappointed with men did not look to women to satisfy their desires. Van Gelder recalls it was especially hard to envision all the qualities we loved in our female friendships: understanding, easiness, intimacy, in a hot sexual package. Married and monogamous, it took years before she allowed herself to experience same-sex love and finally to choose lesbianism, a choice that she wholeheartedly celebrates. That was just a little tidbit that I wanted to read from there, and now I wanted to read from the whole section about men. Looking for love and looking for a man are two very different agendas. Most women without male partners are looking for a man, and guess what? Men are easy to find. Finding a man is not the same as finding love. To find love with a male partner, women have to be clear that this is our desire. The feminist movement exposed the harsh truth of woman hating. More than at any other time in the history of this nation, the word misogynist became commonplace. It was the shortcut way to describe a sexist, patriarchal, woman-hating male. But the other reality that feminism exposed, which was more uncomfortable for women to talk about, was female hatred of men. Years ago, in the heyday of the contemporary feminist movement, I remember lesbian women joking all the time about how wrong the world was in casting them in the role of man-haters, because everyone knew that if you gathered a bunch of women together in a room and started talking about men, the most vicious, man-hating sentiments would be expressed by women who were with men and who were planning to stay with men for the rest of their lives. Hearing these comments again and again, knowing firsthand the truth in these words, I searched my soul to see what my honest feelings about men were. I determined that if I looked inside and saw that I really held men in contempt, I would cease considering them as potential partners and lovers. When I looked inside, I found my thinking about men dominated by three images: my patriarchal father, whom I feared, at times hated, and wished was dead; my eccentric anti-patriarchal grandfather, whom I never feared, loved at all times, and wanted to live forever; and my playful older brother. My father did not care for our souls. He worked hard to care for our material needs. I appreciated this, but I never felt he loved me, even when I tried to please him to meet the conditions he set. Even though I was told that he'd been mad about me, thrilled with his new baby girl when I was first born, taking me everywhere and showing me off, the dad I knew most intimately was cold, withholding, aloof, and emotionally shut down. Daddy Gus, my grandfather, was anti-materialistic and loved me unconditionally. My dad was given to intense anger and now and then would throw a major violent fit. Our granddad was always kind and gentle, and he never spoke in anger. Our mother told us that he was this way not just with his grandchildren, but that he'd been this way with his own children throughout their lives. She admired and loved him. Then there was my brother, Kenneth. We looked like twins, even though he came first. Kenneth was everything a boy was not supposed to be: sweet, tender, playful, and fearful of being hurt. He charmed us with his humor. He was everything that Dad was not. His sisters loved him, and he loved us. We loved our brother, the eternal boy, ever Peter Pan, but we mostly feared grown men. Honestly, had Mama's father, Daddy Gus, not have been in my life, I believe I might easily have become a man-hating woman, or at best, a woman who just simply feared men. Lots of women fear men. It can be a cover-up for repressed killing rage. Fear can lay the foundation for contempt and hatred. When girl children are learning what men are like within patriarchal culture and shaping our sense of them, we look to the male authority we know to teach us about masculinity. If the primary male figures in our lives are cruel, unkind, and in some cases violently abusive, this is the way we think men are. If the men in our lives, our fathers, uncles, grandfathers, brothers, stand idly by while older women abuse us, then we lose respect for them. We do not forgive them their failure to protect us from harm. I'm grateful that the images of masculinity and Black masculinity surrounding me as a child were varied. I knew that lots of Black men and men were macho like my dad, but I also knew there were men like my granddad, calm, gentle, and kind. These diverse images shaped my perspective. In my childhood, there were black men who were not ashamed to express their love of God openly and to shed ecstatic tears. These men were renegades, rebelling against the patriarchal norm. And they were the men I was destined to love, the sensitive, soulful, shy men who were looked down upon by the patriarchy. The men who inhabited my dreams were men of feeling. I think that's enough reading. And it's time for us to have a dialogue. As Brian said, it's not a time for speeches, and if you're going on too long with loving kindness, I will ask you to stop. Feel free to say your name loudly and ask a question. There are many of us here, and we want to have time for meaningful discussion. Who's willing to start us off?
And I do have a microphone if people would. If I can get it. Can I get the microphone sort of down to the center there by Gail Tremblay, please? Conveniently. And if people would queue up or line up to use the microphone, that'd be awfully nice.
Yeah, that would make things flow better. Where's our first question coming from? I can't even see. Okay, go ahead, stand up and go ahead. Your name?
My name's Liza Rognus, and I have a question. And it's about patriarchy, but it's also about the element of possessiveness. Possessiveness politically, possessiveness personally. And so if you could link those two, I know this is kind of a quick flash, but those are two things that come to me when I hear you speak, are these two themes. And so wondering if you could link them.
Well, for me, when I think about possessiveness, I first think about domination and ownership, the idea of who can occupy a space. I mean, who can feel like this space is theirs? You know, I think about all the Muslim people who died in the World Trade Center, but we don't hear about them. In fact, somehow our mass media mythologizes that space and makes it suddenly a space where Americans died. There were people from more than 66 countries that lost their lives in the World Trade Center. Many of those people were not Christians. And yet think of the kind of Christianity that has been evoked as though somehow there is this world divided between Christians who are good people and everybody else who are potential evil, bad people. And all of that denies the reality of who was really there. The many, many non-English speaking people that you couldn't hear about on your television screens because our television screens don't let us hear another language other than English on our primetime channels, where we might have heard from people from all different walks of life and experience. And I say that because I would like you to think about that immediate experience in terms of ownership. Who gets to own the narrative? Because a lot of our deconstruction of Western civilization and imperialist, white supremacist, capitalist patriarchy was just about that questioning of ownership. Who owns the story? Whose story does it belong to? You know, the fact is, whoever dropped those bombs weren't trying to kill masses of white men, because masses of white men are not the people who have to go to work at the World Trade Center at 8 o'clock in the morning. And you look on your computers for the breakdown of who the people were in those buildings, the people whose lives were so deeply touched. They were so varied, so widespread. I mean, you have to live in New York like I do to know, who do you see when you go outside your door at 8 o'clock in the morning in New York City? You don't see affluent people. You see workers often, poor workers, immigrant workers, people, the homeless people shuffling around at the beginning of day. Those of us like myself who are incredibly affluent brag about how we don't have to go outside until after 10 o'clock. You know, I mean, that's part of the status of the lives we live within. that we don't have to go rushing out at the crack of dawn to get to work. And that's why, in New York, many of our stores don't even open until after 10 o'clock. Because the lives of the affluent are, our very time schedules are structured around the lives of the affluent. I just want you to think about that in terms of narratives and ownership. Who owns what narratives? How can we have a global narrative? We cannot have the kind of global narrative Brian talked about and cling to the narrative that reinforces and maintains imperialist, white supremacist, capitalist patriarchy. It is impossible. We've got to give up that narrative. And to me, that's where we come back to love, because love is the only practice of interdependency that invites us to tell the truth, to give up all our narratives of possession and ownership, and to create narratives of mutuality and interdependency. Another question? If you will come down to the mic before, then we won't have to lose time waiting. Your name?
Nomi. Let's see. Well, I really appreciate the work that you do, bringing together, talking about love and talking about identity and politics and all these different things. And as a Jew, one of the most painful things for me right now is what's going on in Israel-Palestine, and I'm interested to hear your perspective on that and how that relates to what you're talking about.
Forgive me that I won't answer that question only because tonight we have such a short time together. I'll talk about it in the course of my days here because I think that that's such a deep and complicated question to answer in a short moment. And I think there's one of the things I feel about our culture is we don't respect the pause, and we don't respect that there are times that we need to reflect on things before we answer. So I beg your forgiveness in this particular moment because I think that's such an incredibly large topic to talk about, and yet we know what we can say about it is that once again we go back to narratives of land and ownership, who were the first people, who was there, who have rights to live. I will urge you to read Power Politics, the new book by, tonight I'm just so bad on names, Anuradha, thank you, who wrote the God of Small Things, but she has incredible essays in the book Power Politics, published by South End Press. And I will come back to your question throughout my week, and maybe we'll see each other because it's too complicated for the amount of time this evening. I want to be short. I want your questions to be shorter, and that's not a short answer question.
Okay, thank you.
Hi.
Your name?
My name's Micah. Thank you so much for your work. So much of the writing that you're doing about love is focusing on men and women and is often separated.
Have you read all three of my books?
I haven't.
Okay,
I've read
because
all
they
about
don't
love.
focus on men and women, but go ahead.
Okay, tonight I've heard you talking a lot about women and men. And in All About Love, that was some of my experience reading it. And I'm wondering how you see this struggle for love playing out for people who don't fit into the binary gender system.
I don't know how anyone who reads All About Love, because there's so much in All About Love as in Communion about how my books really aren't about romantic love. It just so happens that I read those particular passages tonight. They're really saying that true love often comes from friendship, from being in circles of love. And I know that All About Love has a chapter on community. And I think that one of the things that we have to face is, every time we talk about men and women, things that are true for men and women in love are often true for same-sex relationships in our culture because we all think about love and relationships in the same fucked up ways. In terms of domination, there is no evidence that really tells us that masses of people that are gay think about love differently, any more than when I wrote about black people, gay and straight. People kept asking me, do black people think about love differently? And I said the same thing, no. The forms our loving take may be different. the sense of what love can be in our lives. But most people in our culture believe that love relationships consist of somebody who's passive, somebody who's dominant, and, somebody who gets more love while somebody gets less. And that seems to cut across our preferences. But I think it's interesting because I think, here's an example. I stood up here and talked about how in salvation and communion, I particularly chose to include 2 chapters about same-sex love. And then I'm told, well, you're writing these books about love that simply focus on men and women. I don't see how one can say that in light of what I just said. And so I urge you to read the books and see for yourself. But, I think that this is important because a lot of times we ask people to focus on other things. We critique them, and when they do, we continue our critique. Like, for example, black people who will say to white people, we want you to do something about your racism, and the person does, and then we're not satisfied. We critique what they did. Or, and I know I do that with sexism, that I'll critique the men in my life, and then I'll critique them some more after they try to make their adjustment. I think this is very deep because it has a lot to do with ownership, again, of narratives. Who do we feel has a right to speak a certain narrative, and when do we feel people are doing enough? If you saw the movie The Mexican, it kept raising the question, when is enough enough? So I just want to throw that out to you. Next question.
I want to raise a clarification, but I won't if it's taking.
What is your clarification quickly?
I actually wasn't talking about sexual orientation. I was talking about gender and intersex, transsexual, transgender, and genderqueer experiences. That's all.
Well, again, though, I just really feel that if someone's talking about a body of work that you haven't read, and if you don't use those words, we constantly act as if something is not being talked about if the words that matter to us are not there. Do you know that black people and other people of color have had to read books and learn from them and be nourished by them that never mention the words that are vital to us? But that doesn't mean that the books aren't vital, So I urge you to think about that. Why do we often expect people of color to cover every boundary, say every word, don't leave anything out, don't not mention me, when we've had so many years of learning how to take nourishment from something that does not mention us directly, to empathize. Because I think it's very dangerous that right now in our culture, whenever black people speak, we act as though this is a new trend in America. Black people are just concerned about themselves, and they're not speaking about the things that affect so many other people. And I'm not just speaking directly to her question. I'm talking about a trend in our nation where black people are frequently, in therapy we call it discounting. You discount what the person has said to name for them. Notice how that young lady, at first, it was not all those words. But then when I answered her back, it was all the words that I didn't use. This is discounting, and I want to say this because this is an incredible moment for black people where we're constantly being asked, why aren't you talking about this group or that group or saying more? And I think that we have to ask, why do people have so much trouble reading their lives into the lives of black people? Do you know what I'm saying? When I read Faulkner's Light in August, and all the images of black people were degrading. But there was an image of Lena traveling, journeying, the white woman. I read my life into hers. I read my life as a Southern black girl who wanted to journey into the life of this white woman who was journeying. And she said again in that novel, we've come a fur piece. And many times in my life, as I've journeyed, I've had to say to myself, I've come a fur piece, linking my life to her life. Even though Faulkner was racist, even though Faulkner was sexist, even though he didn't mention me in any way that spoke to my immediate reality. And I say that because until people can identify with experiences that are not like their own and read themselves into it rather than needing that person to say all the words that are relevant to them, I don't think people will ever be able to acknowledge the full humanity of black people. Because we're constantly asking black people to speak for this and speak for this. I don't know if you know the mood of the nation right now. The mood of this nation is so anti-black right now, it's disturbing. You know, and I've never been at a transgender conference, transsexual conference, where any black person has stood up and said, "Why aren't you talking about blackness?" I haven't, and I go to those conferences a lot. I'm just saying that there is a time and a place for us to demand certain forms of inclusion, exclusion. And that I'm just asking you not so much to answer me back with your smart, privileged stances, but to think about what I'm saying. To think about how much have you really thought about your identification with blackness? How much have you ever thought about what you expect from black people and black women? I talk about mammification. Re-mammify me. I'm not serving you and your interests. So don't talk about what I just gave you. Talk about what I'm not giving you. You haven't served me enough, Kizzy. Come back on my plantation and serve me some more. I mean, this is what's happening with race in our nation. We're being told as black people, racism doesn't exist. Why are you guys talking about racism? Why are you talking about this and that? Why aren't you more inclusive? My goodness, if white people were asked as much as black people to be more inclusive, racism would no longer be a problem. You know? And I want to say this, that response was not simply to the young woman who spoke, it was to a whole range of people who are speaking, demanding of black people a quality of discourse that often is not based on reading and studying our work, but about assumptions about us. You know, and we have to take issue with that respectfully. You're the next person. What? Okay.
This is a real privilege, I have to say.
Your name?
Molly. I just wanted to know if in the times of your growing into yourself, was there a point when you realized yourself and your voice, like that you are taking in all of your information, but that bell is like, I don't know,
Well, I think for me, you're talking about self-actualization, and self-actualization is an ongoing process. You know, because like any abuse survivor, there are times when I forget myself, there are times when I regress. Every abuse survivor in this room who's in recovery knows what I'm talking about, that there are times when no matter how much I've developed as bell hooks, that something triggers me and I go right back into being the abused, beaten up, wounded child, and I have to recover myself again. So that I think self-recovery is a constant process in our lives, particularly because we don't live in a world that affirms our struggle for self-recovery, for love, so that we're constantly having to reinvent ourselves. But there is a moment, I think for me, there's a moment in my life now where I have the confidence of my own experience, so that I trust that if I lose myself, I will find myself again. And I think that that was a point of real recovery for me, both in therapy and in my spiritual practice within Buddhism, within Christianity, that sense of being grounded in self-love and self-knowledge. The next question. Sorry that we have to be short tonight. I'm going to be here for 2 weeks, and there'll be lots of other times to take issue with me and argue and talk. Your name?
My name is Marisa Kaneshiro, and I wanted to ask you a question. Can you expand on your definition? Can you hear me?
Yes, can I
Okay.
expand on my definition?
Your definition of love that you have in All About Love, and the idea, the truth that love is learned and not, as we assume, instinctual.
In All About Love, the idea that most bothered people, and what I felt was the most revolutionary but commonplace, I thought, idea, was that you're not being loved when someone is abusing you. But today I spent an hour on this radio show being yelled at by a number of people, mostly men, who argued that they'd been beaten by their parents and it was great for them. And in fact, they felt loved. But the definition of love I put forth in All About Love said that love is a combination of care, commitment, knowledge, responsibility, respect, and trust. And that most of us think of care as the only way we love. And I've never wanted to diminish care. For example, my parents really cared for me. They cared for me Monday through Thursday, but they abused me on a Friday. The fact that they abused me on a Friday doesn't change the fact that they cared for me. You know, we have all these studies that talk about a lot of times when people want to separate abused children from their parents, they want to stay with their parents. And then they try to make it seem like, why on earth would they want to stay with these people who've hurt them so badly? But they don't acknowledge that people may hurt you badly one day and be very caring for you the next, but that's not love. You know, I knew as a 6-year-old that these people who were saying mean and vicious things to me weren't loving me. But I did know that I felt cared for. So care is a dimension of love. I think that's why that definition has been so important for me, because most of us equate care with love. That's why so many feminist women want to believe that women are more loving than men, which I don't believe that women are inherently more loving than men. Women give more care in patriarchal society than men. But that's not necessarily giving love. But that care is truly important. And I wouldn't be here without the care that my parents gave to me, because I've met other black folks who've never had any care. And their souls are deeply diminished. I honor the care that my parents gave me, and at the same time, I say that it wasn't love, because there was so much abuse that went on in that matrix at the same time. So that would be my addition to that, but I know that's an incomplete answer, but tonight is a night of incompleteness. You know, and I ask you to think about that in a Buddhist sense, that the world we live in is incomplete, that we want absolutes, we want answers. That's why we want the speaker, the intellectual, to cover everything. There's no way, because we are in a constant moment of change. There is no way that we can have completion. Completion is death. Your name?
Lori,
Yes?
I was wondering how serious we could get before humor was mandatory.
Well, I mean, I definitely have been saying to Brian that humor is needed in any revolution. Without it, you know, I think our revolutions fail. I think this has been a serious problem within feminism and within the left in general in the United States. You know, even as a Buddhist, you know, I go to so many Buddhist conferences and there's no humor frequently, even though the Dalai Lama and Thich Nhat Hanh are men of great humor. You know, there's a level at which people don't want to have humor. I think that's interesting, because if you go to fundamentalist Christian events, you'll often find lots of joy and humor. I always found it profoundly sad that the black people who didn't die in the Jim Jones massacre because they weren't there that day gave testimony that it was only as members of that group that they felt they did not experience racism in this society. That was the first time they felt white people treated them as equals and that they experienced a sense of joy. I always found that very, very deep, because we often make fun of fundamentalist cults or fundamentalist groups, but we don't often look on the left at what do those groups offer to people that we don't necessarily offer to people in our spaces of radicalism. You know, in Mario's class today, we talked about how sometimes our spaces of radicalism can become spaces where we are fascistic in our judgments. This person is this, so we won't talk to them. This person is, you know, sexist, or this person is homophobic, or we make these judgments that can be as severe as the judgments the right often makes of us, and then we cancel people out. Well, I don't read this person because, or I don't talk to this person because, and I think that that's very much a danger, and I encourage you to think about radical openness. What does it mean? It means the willingness to think anew, to not hold onto a position because your identity is tied to it. I mean, that's been the danger of identity politics, We both need identity politics, and we need to organize beyond identity politics. And that's very difficult for people to understand. Another question? Your name?
Sophia. Ooh, I wanted to ask you, you talk in your books a lot about your father and the abuse that happened with you and your father, and I was wondering how you are working on your relationship with him now in terms of love and how that's connected to your relationship with men romantically.
Well, you know, it's so funny because my father, I wrote my father a letter, you know, because my parents have been very hurt by the books that I write and by the things that I say. I don't know if you saw my dear friend Marlon Riggs' film, gay black filmmaker from San Francisco, his film Black Is, Black Ain't, which was very interesting because I had been writing about my parents for years. And it's like they didn't really care. They didn't really think books matter. But in Marlon's film, it was a few days, it was the last time I saw Marlon alive before he died of AIDS. And our filming that day was very, very passionate. And I talked about my mom and dad, if you saw the film. And then the film showed on PBS, and my parents were outraged. They were angry. And typical of women who identify with the patriarchy, my mother was more outraged than my dad. You know, she called me up to say, you know, how dare I talk about the family? How dare I tell their business? You know, and I was saying, well, Mom, that's just it. It wasn't just your business. You know, he wasn't just being violent to you. We were both witnesses to his violence and traumatized by it. And so I feel a tremendous debt to my parents. In Remembered Rapture, there's a dedication to them that says, I bow down to them in the deepest bodhisattva sense of the word, of humility. Because more than any people, they bear the weight of my words, of my public confessions, that I told them, I believe black people are in crisis collectively. And I believe that in order to heal, we have to share some of our stories that are personal and deep. And I don't really care to share my stories. Sometimes I force myself to share my stories because I'm so concerned about what's happening to us as African Americans. Last year, when I went on tour with Salvation, Black People in Love, so many black men came up to me to talk about incest or sexual abuse by a stranger, who had never spoken before, but whose lives were full of suffering. Unfortunately, that requires many of us to do the work of opening our lives in a public way. And right now, so I've written to my parents and to my dad, and I've tried to talk to them, but I'm not going to stand here and lie to you. It damages my relationship to them. I see that they're tense. You know, I was saying yesterday to an audience that when I come home, they say, oh, that's right, we can't say this, you know, because she'll write a book about it. Oh, we can't yell at her like my mother will tell my little nieces and nephews. Well, I can't yell at you because Miss Bell Hooks, well, you'll grow up and be like her and write a book and say, you know, we're abusing you. So I think that in their use of humor and signifying, they communicate to me how my words have hurt them. I mean, think about how it is when your parents have spent years of their life trying to cover up how fucked up their lives are, the bullshit that goes on, and then some kid comes along and gets on TV and starts telling everybody, telling their neighbors. You know, for many of us from poor and working class backgrounds, that can lead to excommunication. And that's why we fear opening ourselves. You know, I used to envy those white kids I went to school with at Stanford who were in therapy and their parents were encouraging them to talk openly, because my parents were saying, we don't want you to say shit about what goes on in this house to anybody else. So there was that whole sense of what do we do as people of color, as white people from poor backgrounds who find that in order to heal, we have to go against the boundaries, we have to press against the boundaries, and we don't have a safety net. Most of us don't have that therapist that we can fall back on. I have had so many white friends that say, well, girl, I don't see why you see your dad anymore. You know? And I think, well, maybe there's a luxury to those people who can give up on their parents. You know, I don't feel that I have the luxury of giving up on my parents. You know, I'm surrounded by whiteness in my little apartment in the West Village. You know, I get on the phone, and when I hear Dad's voice speaking in the vernacular of our region, speaking in the tenderness of my childhood, I want to hear that voice eternally because it brings me back to myself. And that's where I want you to think with me, audience, tonight in a more complex manner. Because despite his sexism, I want to hear his voice. This is the contradictions. Today in Mario's class, we talked about how sometimes in our lives we have to make peace with contradictions. You know, that as screwed up as my family can be, now I will not allow them to abuse me. But that does not mean that I want to decide, well, they're too sexist for me to know. My sister, who's a lesbian, went on this kick that she couldn't come home because mom and dad were just too homophobic. And I said to her, okay, let's talk about this. If you had a car accident tomorrow and you couldn't wipe your ass or move, who do you think would come and get you, take you home, care for you 24/7? Now, I'm your feminist, supportive sister, and I know I wouldn't want that task. But mom and dad, despite their homophobia, would have come, and she faced that, change. It's not that we want these people to remain homophobic. We don't. We want them to change. But we also want to see them in their complexity. And that is so hard in a society of domination that's always saying, judge this person as good or bad. Judge this person as progressive or conservative. And then when you've made the appropriate judgment, toss them away. What does it mean to say, I want to hold these people in my love? My mom has sent me these horrible presents for so many years, and now that I'm going on 50, I said to her, Mom, I'm just so touched that there has been one person in this world who has never left me alone at holiday times, who has always thought of me and touched me with her tenderness. And many of you in this room who've lost your parents know that, that's a big loss. And my mom may still be just as annoyed with feminism. They think feminism and then Buddhism. Mom called me a month ago and said, one of the relatives called her to say that I was a Buddhist. Was this true? And I was like, oh, well, Mom, I wouldn't exactly say that I'm a Buddhist. I would say that I write for Buddhist magazines. And she was like, well, that's good, because Buddhism is Satanism. I'm like, okay. And even part of growing up is I don't feel the need to teach her about this anymore. At 70 years old, so that I want to say this about love. A crucial part of love is acceptance. Not accepting people where they are and recognizing that people can change at any moment and do. That's why Thich Nhat Hanh's quote is at the beginning of Salvation, Black People in Love, where he says that just in a moment in time, we can be enlightened. I was in Chicago last week, and I'm going to begin to close here. I apologize for all of you who have questions. I'm getting tired. I've been working since early this morning. In Chicago last week, I talked to a young Black woman, and I told this story earlier today, so those of you who heard it, forgive me, who had beautiful dreadlocks, and she said to me that we were talking about self-love, because I've just finished a new book that's going to come out in a few months called Soul to Soul, Black People in Self-Esteem. And she said to me that as a girl in a two-parent home, affluent, going to a gifted school, that she went to school one day with her hair in braids, and a little white girl that was a friend said to her, "You're so cute, you look just like a monkey." And she said at that moment in time, she made up her mind, I will never wear my hair in its organic, natural state again. And what we talked about was how something in us can be shattered in just a few moments in time. Maybe this incident took all of 3 minutes, but it shattered something within her that it took her 20 years to come back to and recover. The capacity for self-love that begins with the body, with loving yourself as you are, without feeling that you have to change anything about yourself. And we talked about the fact that Thich Nhat Hanh says that recovery, the recovery of ourselves, can happen in just so many moments, because one day, think about her mind like a computer screen. One day, she read a bell hooks book, and she opened her mind and she pressed that delete button. She deleted that narrative from her mind, and she put in to that computer of her mind another message. I am essentially of good and worthy of love just the way that I am. And that was the beginning of her transformation. That's why Thich Nhat Hanh says we can have recovery. We can have wholeness in just a matter of seconds. We can come back to ourselves. Let me hear a couple of questions, and I'll try to take them together. I'll mix them together. If you don't mind, I apologize. I apologize for this hurried kind of question and answer period, which may make me slightly more impatient than I normally am. Okay, a name, a question? Your name? Go ahead. Don't worry.
Okay. I'm Jenny, and thanks for coming to Olympia. I was wondering if you could give us some incomplete ideas about what we should do with all these problems and in the spirit of love. Some ideas of what to do about these things.
Well, see, okay. Throw in another question and I'll put them together.
Well, my question is also about love. It's kind of about big love and little love, love for the big movement and love for ourselves. You wrote a book called Feminist Theory, Margin to Center, and I read it, and I really liked it. And the thing is that it's all inclusive. It calls us to see beyond ourselves to include all. And while one can open heart to everything, I worry sometimes about keeping some strength, and I wonder if you could speak on that.
Well, I think that that's a very capitalist notion of love that tells us, you know, you can't open your heart to everything. You got to keep something back. Because in fact, you know, I tell you, I am honored, as I know Don, he may not be here tonight, Don Vance, but those of us who have had the opportunity to really be in the presence of Thich Nhat Hanh and the Dalai Lama, those men are old men. But when you're in their presence, you feel like you're in the presence of these young men. They exude joy. They exude bliss. And I think part of it is that they don't act like, oh, if I give out today, I'm going to be diminished. What they both seem to invest in is a notion that love is ever replenishing. And I can touch you with my love. And I think that that's really hard for us in the West, because even those of us who claim to be anti-capitalist, anti-materialist, actually live with the fear that we're going to be diminished if I give too much, if I open my heart to too many, you know. And I think that as long as we feel that way, we will reinvest in territorialism, you know, false notions of solidarity as people of color, you know, where we can only relate to other people of color, because we believe that something will be diminished within ourselves. White people who feel they can only relate to other white people who are just like them. You know, I think that we really have to trust in love as a force that grows stronger as we extend ourselves. You know, as I extend myself out in love, I've found that I'm more willing to extend myself out in love to the people that aren't like me, to the people that I don't understand, to the people that get on my nerves. You know, and I'm challenged all the time to think about that the nature of love. Now, what happened to me here in my middle-aged brain was that I forgot the question that I was going to include, the one that came before that one, which was what was the heart of it?
Ideas about what we should
Oh, okay. Well, see, one of the things that I believe is everybody in this room knows what they need to do. I mean, one of the false consciousness, I believe, of domination is we doubt ourselves. We doubt our capacity to do the work of justice. One of the things that I felt very strongly as I've gone around the nation since September 11th, that one of the reasons so many people, I don't know, I can't tell you, as I sat in my flat on September 11th, and the hate that surrounded my neighborhood, because my neighborhood was closed off, and the bomb squad, the big New York bomb squad, is a street over from mine. And I was so struck by people that I love and respect suddenly having tremendous messages of hate. I mean, it was almost kind of paralyzing, because it made you feel as if the world that you knew most intimately had suddenly changed. And I thought about the fact that people feel so like they can't resolve issues of love in their own lives. you know, it's like 2 weeks ago, I was having this argument with my ex-boyfriend to whom my books are dedicated, and I was saying to him, you know, how can I go out on the road and talk about love and tell people to love when I'm so mad at you and I can't resolve, and we've been trying to resolve this stuff, you know? And I feel like what I hear in lots of people in our nation is we cannot resolve the intimate terrorism in our own lives. Think about the people that you love. Students today who says, I don't talk to my brother because of his fundamentalist Christianity, or I don't, you know, the ways in which we are closed off to the people we know most intimately. I mean, think about the fact that there are parents in this room who would be willing to give their lives for their children, for their teenagers, but can't have a civil conversation with them. I think that what has happened to us as a nation that has grown so mired in lovelessness is that we are very cynical about love. We do not believe that we can have global peace because we don't even feel that we can have peace where we live. And I think that that despair in our intimate lives is a despair that we are projecting out into the world right now with a global cynicism. And you know, one of the things that occurred to me, you know, I always feel like I get these light bulb moments that, you know, where suddenly things are illuminated. And I realized in my own relationships of love, it is so much more easier to make war. It is so much easier for me to find fault, judge, accuse, blame, nag, criticize, than it is for me to find out what are the ways that can bring me closer to those that I love. And I think that there are so many people that are experiencing that sense of how come it's so hard to love. I think that's why Martin Luther King called his book Strength to Love. So that I think if we begin, as Pema Chodron, that great Buddhist teacher says, start where you are. You know, let's start where we are tonight. How much love, you know, are you willing to show me if I haven't said what you think I should have said in the manner in which you think I should have said it? You know, how much love am I willing to show you? You know, I think that that is the challenge for us, to begin where we are and to extend that outward, because as long as we try to go outward, I mean, think about feminism. Feminism has failed as a mass-based movement in our society. Our movements to end racism have failed as mass-based movements, largely because people begin to withdraw when they felt like they couldn't change this world immediately for everybody. Let's begin where we are. Let's think about, what am I able to change? What are the tools that you use in your life for peace? What are the tools that you use in your life for inner peace? Those are the same tools that you need to have peace with me. You know, when people say to me, white people say to me, well, what can I do, you know, about racism? I said, well, what do you do when you're in love with somebody? You know, one of the things people do when they're in love with people is they get the facts. You know, if I have a crush on somebody, I'll find somebody who knows that person, and I'll say, well, can you tell me about so-and-so? Is she married? Is he married? You know, we'll get the 411, but we'll, like, you know, when we want to know about another group to which we don't belong, like if I want to know about my Chinese sister there, I want to go to her, you know, and say, can you tell me everything I need to know in a few paragraphs? You know, white people come to black people and say, well, can you tell me? To other people of color, what can I do? We don't get the 411, and yet we know how to get the 411. Go to libraries, read, study. Ask yourself, how do I need to prepare myself? You know, when I go to meet my spiritual teachers, I prepare myself. I prepare what in Buddhism we talk as the ground of my being. I don't go to them and say, hey, here's all my ridiculous shit. You know, please listen to it and heal me. You know? I mean, and think about again, what do you do when you're attracted to somebody? Do you show them the worst of yourself and say, oh, please want to connect with me? I think that, you know, those tools that we use, this is again why I think love is important. Think about the tools that you feel that you have, that you use every day of your life to get by in your life, to know joy, to have love, and apply those same tools in the situation of difficulty. I mean, I talked about the fact in Mario's class today that I often sit next to white men on airplanes who are very rude to me. Very rarely do they speak to me. And part of me, my ego, gets in the way, and I think, I'm not speaking to that bald white man that's sitting next to me. That's how I felt coming here. I was like, he's not even looking at me. He's ignoring my presence. And then the voice of love says, well, honey, how is that being loving? You know, maybe Divine Spirit wants you to sit next to this man today and touch him with your love. And that's the kind of way that I have to talk back to myself so I don't become self-indulgent and feel like I want to talk to the cool, cute white people. You know, the white people that are the kind of chocolates I want to buy. You know, I don't want to talk to this white businessman with his bulging belly and his balding hair and his complete lack of interest in bell hooks. You know? And to me, again, I have to approach that person. I actually thought about the night before, I seemed to just be having a lot of arguments with my ex, and I had an argument with him the night before, but, you know, I kept trying to talk to him. So I asked myself, what is the difference? Because Buddhism encourages me to think about the nature of attachment. Why is my ex-boyfriend worthy of dialogue, but this white man whom I might lose my life sitting next to him? This might be the last moment of my life, and yet I feel like he's not good enough for me. You know, he may not be feminist enough for me. He may not be enlightened enough for me. And that's the kind of push, but I know what to do because I knew what to do in that situation before. Love guided me in the situation before, so I have to look to love to guide me in the other situation. I really apologize, and I apologize because I feel tired tonight. I've been going all day, but I wanted to talk to the community as a whole, and we didn't have a time for that. I wanted time for the people, and I want to say thank you to the people who have come here who are not at Evergreen College, for whom it's an inconvenience, you know, to come here where parking is so far away. I think that, you know, I want to say that because there are people who have come here tonight who are standing up, who worked all day. And I think that we have to honor their presence because it's different from those of us who are used to being on campuses, who are used to the demands of this territory. I want to thank Brian. I want to thank Amy. I want to thank Arky, who is my companion in care. But most of all, I want to thank my friend Gilder Shepard, who did the initial work of persuading me that it was my destiny to be here again, and I should come irrespective of how tired I am in my life and be at Evergreen. The work of love seems to me to be eternal. And I can only offer you my profound testimony, which is testimony that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross also shared at the end of her life, that as she gave love, she felt her strength and her passion was renewed and her soul was restored. And before I came on stage tonight, and I felt really tired, and I felt that I didn't have the energy to speak, I had that moment of meditation where I prayed for the restoration of my soul, that there would be the kind of energy in this room that would lift me up and hold me and embrace me with the kind of love that would allow me to give to you. I thank you for that.